Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everybody. This is Jumpin' John Prevost. I will be your host tonight, and along with me is my cohort in crime, the Judge Ray Jaffe. Jennifer Struder is unavoidably detained tonight, which means she's probably out having a good time without us. But Ray, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, John. How are you?
Doing fantastic. I'm sorry I missed our show last week, but I was doing some family duties, so it was all good. I still got my fix in by hosting the Thursday night show, but I do enjoy our Monday night shows. So
well, it's still preseason for us too, so we're working out the kinks and getting our vacation in before the real thing starts. But I am excited because this is sort of, for the football fans, the fantasy fans, you start to feel it now because as you go into week 3 of the preseason, it's usually the week where you actually get to see some real reads on players, and you're getting the half or 3/4 out of the starters. And you have that little lull week 4, but we are 2 weeks and 1 day away from the real thing.
2 weeks and 1 day, and that's actually why, Ray, I think tonight we're going to run down a little bit about the actual preseason games. We didn't talk much about week 1, but I think there's some definite nuggets we can take from week 2. Granted, it is still preseason, but being the fantasy expert that you are, I think we can gain some nuggets of information about what went down, and I think that's going to be our play for tonight. So
and the news is coming in fast and furious. There's even in the last 4 or 6 hours, there's been some stories that we'll hit on. So a lot happening as the NFL starts to round into shape for the regular season.
Well, hey, Brad, I gotta tell you, we got some chat activity already, and you're riling them up after 2 weeks. So I think 2 weeks is a good marking period that you can start ramping people up and getting them excited. So
Love
you
it.
led the charge. Yes, you led the charge. Well, I'll tell you, though, one of the things I did miss this weekend is I missed Fantasy Fest, and I believe you were in attendance, at least on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Fantasy Fest and how that went?
Fantasy Fest was a great event. I was there Sunday, actually broadcasting live on ESPN Radio with the commission, the professor, and some of the kick-ass fantasy football crew. Saturday I was not there, so I missed Michael Vick, LaShawn McCoy, some others. Sunday I was there. Phil Simms was in attendance, Joe Theismann, a couple other folks. They had areas to kick field goals, so it was funny to watch some guys run up in sandals and docksiders and try and kick some field goals. A place to throw the ball around, you catch out of a wheel machine, and lots of booths. I'll tell you, lots of activity and interest in fantasy football. Whether it's new hosting sites, people showing their trophies that they've created for fantasy football and selling those. Even some sponsors of the show. The fantasy judge, Judge Mike, who does fantasy judgment. So lots of there must have been memorabilia was there, probably easily 50 booths and lots of activity, lots of fantasy football talk. So
you met the fantasy judge, did you?
I did meet the fantasy judge. Good guy, the fantasy judge.
Oh, great. I think, so for our listeners out there, that's one of the enhancements that we have this week, and I think if you go to our website, www.kickassfantasyfootball.com, you can read a little more about it, but he's adjudicating fantasy disputes, which is no, not that we've ever had any in our league, right? Have we?
No, of course not. Never.
No, of course not. Never. But so I believe, is it one free for when you sign up for our website, one free adjudication, and it's I think it's a great offer to have someone that with no personal no personal gain in it coming in and listening to both sides of an argument and issuing his judgment, thus the fantasy judgment. So
yeah, it's interesting, and to me it's a good service because the reality of it is fantasy. One, there's a lot of pride on the line sometimes, but two, there's some real money being played for in these leagues. So for $15, $30, $15 for judgment or a fee annually to keep it fair, as Rodney Dangerfield would say. It's an interesting investment.
Cool. I think that sounded like it was a great time. I'm sorry I missed it, and I will definitely hope to be in attendance for next year. So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna throw you a curveball to start, right? And I think I'm gonna start with the biggest news of the day, and that biggest news is that Michael Strahan will permanently fill Regis Philbin's seat on Cat. Well, I guess it's no longer Regis and whatever her name is, right? Kelly Ripa. There you go. So what do you think about that? Michael Strahan going legit.
It's a big time gig for Mr. Strahan. I think he'll probably have a little longer run than he had with Brothers, I think it was, or some sitcom he did that was on the air for about 6 episodes. So I know it's a big job. I guess I think he was well beyond his comeback years, but I'm sure this officially takes out any football from the Strahan, and he has gone Hollywood all the way.
Good for him. From what I've heard, he did a good job when he was filling in. I did see Mike Greenberg had a stint on there as well. I saw that, and which was actually hilarious. But so I wish him the best of luck. I think it's kind of a neat thing for him to do, and just shows his versatility.
Yeah, it's he's obviously a talented guy. So maybe he'll add a little football flavor to that show. So we'll keep spreading the good word.
We can only hope. All right, so let's get started then. Couple news of the week, and then we're going to run down and go through some of the game, some of the relevant fantasy notes from the games that were played on week 2. Let's start. Just a lot of quarterback talk, a lot of quarterback values that have been determined already. A couple that we'll start with. Ryan Tannehill was named starter down in Miami. So, do you think that was a good move? And what do you think it's going to last?
Well, I think it will last. Miami doesn't really. I think it's very interesting. I feel like I am maybe the lone Matt Moore supporter around. I don't have a big problem with Matt Moore. I think he's actually a serviceable quarterback. So, the idea of having Tannehill sit and learn for a little while under Matt Moore, I don't think was a terrible idea. Obviously, a curveball was thrown when Garrard got hurt. So that sort of, I think, made them change up their plans. Tannehill's, it's amazing. I saw something, John. I think there's between this year and last year's draft classes, there's something like 8, 9, 10 quarterbacks. Their first or second year quarterbacks are going to be starting. It's amazing. So it's almost like a whole new wave in the NFL. He's going to have some challenges. He doesn't have a great receiving core, but he'll certainly get the reps the rest of the preseason. We'll see how he does.
Yeah, I think one of the things I had heard on the radio, and I'm trying to I'd like to reference it correctly, but I'm not exactly sure where it was Peter King or if it was on a different show, Mike and Mike. But they were talking about the quarterbacks, same issue, and how many seem to be ready. And one of the things they did mention, just as a note for this year and then for future years, that a lot of these quarterbacks, as soon as they're done, it used to be in the old days, they would come out and it was Mark Schlereth, Stink was talking about it. They'd come out and they would finish their quarterbacking career in college, and they work on the studies, graduate, and then they'd end up going to camp. Well, nowadays, the students are done playing football on January 1st. They're going to, these professional camps, and they're going to, whoever. I think Chris Winkie was a big one that was just holding one. They're going to these ex-professionals, and they're getting all the tutelage right away, so that when they even, go to their OTAs and all that, they're already ready. There's so many steps beyond what they were years ago, and I think that's just something to keep track of as these quarterbacks come out, that they're just more NFL ready. So I think that might be one of the reasons why you're seeing that.
The Chris Winkie camp, huh?
Well, you know what? Those who can't do teach. I don't know what to tell you.
Those who can't do teach. And
so,
you know who would be perfect for that camp? Brandon Weeden. Wasn't Wenke like a mid-20-year-old guy when he came out of college?
He was actually. So But, I guess there's at least one team that's hoping Brandon Weeden has a little bit longer of a career than Chris Weinke did. But
maybe it'll be the Weeden-Weinke camp at some point.
Weeden-Weinke camp. That could be where, that could also be like a kid's show or something. Or maybe
if the football camp doesn't work out, yes, they can maybe take over the Wiggles or something.
Yeah, well, there are new Wiggles coming. So, we don't need to get in that discussion because my 2-year-old's not listening. But, I think it's an interesting development as well. I'm not that I'm super high on Matt Moore. I think he's serviceable as well. But I still think that David Garrard wants to be a starting quarterback. And I wouldn't be actually surprised, since he's not starting and I don't see him getting in anytime soon, if they actually trade Garrard, assuming his knee is going to be healthy, which I believe it is. And maybe look for Arizona as a target for Garrard.
Well, I'll tell you what, Arizona's got to find somebody. I'd like to be a starting quarterback too, though, and I'm not. So while Garrard might like to be a starting quarterback, I think there's questions about whether he can be or will be. But you're right, Garrard certainly is better than the Kolb skeleton vaudeville act that's going on in Arizona right now.
I'm not really sure what to make of that. I can't believe they didn't have a fallback plan, unless there's just something we don't know or something they had shown in the past that they're not showing now. And you're right, I would like to be a starting quarterback as well, but I think David Garrard might have a step up on us. I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing he may be a little bit better than we would be prepared to be a starting quarterback. So I think David Garrard, he was showing some promise and was the de facto number one going into camp, and I think they were willing to let Tannehill sit behind Garrard, but just not willing to let him sit behind Matt Moore. So,
yeah.
All right, so on that vein, Jake Locker was named starter for Tennessee, and then he went out and did not show why in this game, but Jake Locker has been named the starter in Tennessee. So what do you think about that development?
I like it. I think it's a good move. Locker did look good last year. Hasselbeck is not a guy. I mean, he's the Titans aren't going to the Super Bowl. They're an okay team. Hasselbeck is towards the tail end of his career, so might as well give him a shot. He certainly looked competent enough last year. So I like Locker a little bit. I think it's going to be interesting to see which receivers he clicks in with. He actually did pretty well. And him and Nate Washington connected pretty well. So I would, with Locker being sort of anointed the starter, I'd keep an eye on Nate Washington. And also I like Kendall Wright. I like Kendall Wright as, really one of my top rookie wide receivers. And, if that Locker-Wright connection surfaces, he could be a viable, deeper QB2, or if you play in a 2 QB league, I think he could make his way on the team as a second quarterback.
Yeah, I think the issue down there is they know what they have in Hasselbeck, and which isn't bad, but as he is getting older, they want to go with the young kids. So I don't know that that's a bad move either. I'm not, especially with the problems Kenny Britt's having. I'm not exactly sure what you're going to see out of the passing game in Tennessee. And frankly, I expect big things from Chris Johnson again this year. And, you can hold off the man crush comments, but
when we talk about the week 2, Johnson, he certainly looked good. Had the 2 14-yard touchdowns. Certainly looked much more like the Chris Johnson of 2 years ago, and he did start to come on the second half of last year. So I think Johnson's back on the radar.
I think he's very high up on the radar. So we'll get to that a little bit. We'll go over some numbers from the games when we do the rundowns. And let's see here. We have Russell Wilson is going to start the third game. He's not been anointed the starter, but I'm wondering what you take on the whole quarterback situation in Seattle is.
Really interesting. I've actually been following this since the beginning of camp. Matt Flynn's who they gave the money to, Green Bay product, coming up in that system, think, he has the kind of pedigree. Russell Wilson is a guy that always has been a little undervalued just because he's undersized. He did amazing things at Wisconsin, third-round draft pick, and he has done nothing but excel in the preseason, and they really want to give him a shot against first-string defenses. I think they really want to see what they have. I don't believe this is a move that's going to turn Wilson into the starter. I think it's still Flynn's job, but I do think they want to see how he performs against first-string defenses. And if he performs as well, or even close to as well as he's been performing, there's going to be a very interesting discussion in Seattle.
Yeah, again, it's one of those issues where money may end up ruling the day, plus just let him get some experience. I do think it's Matt Flynn's job, but I agree. I think it's just kind of a benchmark right now to see where Russell Wilson is at. He's probably further along than they were thinking of when they drafted him, which is a good problem to have. I think Matt Flynn will be the starter, and barring just some really poor performances or injury, he will be in there. It's not all of the year, at least most of the year. But I think it's always a good check to see how he's going to do against first-string defenses, especially in preseason game number 3, which is the most serious of the preseason games.
Wilson's at least gotten it to be. I think it was not even up for discussion coming into camp. I think he's at least starting the discussion.
As long as he's playing well, there's always a discussion. But I think there's a point where money the money that played Matt Flynn, they got to utilize them at least for a good portion of the year just to get their value back. I'll tell you what, Ray, we're going to take a 2-minute break real quick and get some commercials from our sponsors, and then we'll come back. We'll finish up with some of the news and then go into the recaps of the games from a fantasy perspective. And so this is Jumpin' John Prevost with Judge Ray Jaffe, and we'll be back in 2 minutes on the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show.
Listen up, fantasy football owners. If you want top-quality, guaranteed, authentic sports memorabilia, there's only one place to go. Prestige Sports Marketing. They offer autographed baseball and football jerseys, framed jerseys, helmets, bats, photos, and amazing artwork. They're 100% guaranteed authentic, so you can feel 100% confident. Check out Prestige Sports Marketing at PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. That's PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. And a promo code ESPN and get 10% off.
This fantasy football season, be sure to check out Power Play Fantasy Sports, featuring free and pay-to-play fantasy football games with huge cash prizes. Power Play Fantasy Sports is your home for the 2012 fantasy football season. Visit the website PowerPlayFantasySports.com and use the promo code KICK to receive 20% off your entry in the Power Player Fantasy Football League, featuring a $5,000 grand prize. Again, that's promo code KICK. If you know football, this is the game for you. Visit PowerPlayFantasySports.com today.
Fantasy football owners, it's draft time, and KickassFantasyFootball.com makes it easy.
How do we make it easy?
Projections from the experts, cheat sheets with your scoring rules.
What else?
Articles all season long, waiver wire picks, trade advice, everything you need to win a championship.
How about a free judgment from FantasyJudgment.com, a $15 value?
Now we're talking.
Subscribe today for just $9.95 and we'll throw in a complimentary cruise for 2 to the Bahamas.
Cruise to a championship with KickassFantasyFootball.com.
Don't let your fantasy issues become a reality. Fantasy Judgment is the premier dispute resolution service for all fantasy sports leagues. Led by attorney Michael Stein, the Supreme Court of Fantasy Judgment will resolve any and all issues or conflicts that arise in fantasy leagues. This includes disputed trades, collusion, abuse of power by league commissioners, lineup and roster errors, draft issues, score discrepancies, and interpretation of league rules. We alleviate the burden for league commissioners and allow everyone to focus on winning their leagues rather than arguing over disputes. Visit www.fantasyjudgment.com. All
right, everybody, welcome back to the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show on Blog Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevost, and with me is Judge Ray Jaffe. Just to remind everyone that we do have a website, www.kickassfantasyfootball.com. We have weekly articles. We have a couple of different draft analyzer, draft tools that you can utilize. We have division wrap-ups and just a lot of great content on our website. So for $9.95, which is half price until August 31st, you can get a year subscription. And so, Ray, we're back on the air, and we're talking just some news that's been hitting the wires of late. So let's go AP, Adrian Peterson, is obviously a huge fantasy interest. There was some news that he could see some game action Friday. He's returning to practice this week. But then there's news that he will not play in the preseason. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. But everyone's going to want to hear what's going to happen with AP and where they should take him. So I want to get a little bit of your take on Adrian Peterson and what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's right. It sounds like they've sort of done a little bit of a flip-flop. We're talking about trying to get him some live contact and into a game, and now I think they've come off of that and said, he'll practice, he'll go through the drills, but he's not going to get into a game until the regular season. I think that's probably the right decision. Peterson's been around long enough. He doesn't necessarily need the game work. He doesn't need the play calling work. He doesn't need to understand the offense. So I think he's a guy that can just pick it up and go. Good recovery for him. He's sort of in under the wire to make the regular season. It's crazy to say he's a guy that just it continues to. Running backs, after they take a certain amount of toll, start to scare me a little bit. We've had so many examples of Priest Holmes, LaDainian Tomlinson, Sean Allington. There's guys that just were at the pinnacle and just quickly, all of a sudden, the body couldn't take it anymore. I don't know if Peterson's there yet. I think we get maybe one more good season out of Peterson, but I have a little bit of caution around him going into this year.
I would as well. If he's completely healthy, he'd be top 3 running back, I'm sure. Although there's definitely a lot of competition this year, so we'll say at least top 5. He's getting a little bit older. He's had a lot of miles, but with the injury, it's just the uncertainty obviously drops him down a little bit. My only concern, as a lot of people have, that they're just rushing him back too soon, and it's very early, and there's no need to have him play. Even I'd say week 1 and week 2, if there's just not any doubts about his health, because he is their breadwinner. So I'm a little bit surprised. Toby Gerhart's looked good, looks solid. He's not no Adrian Peterson, but he's doing pretty well as a fill-in. So I'm just a little bit surprised by it, but I'm not paid the big bucks to make these decisions.
Yeah, worst case scenario, they might lighten his load a little bit, which you take a little bit of a fantasy ding if they dial back 5 touches a week and give him to Gerhart. That is a possibility.
Which would still make Peterson a pretty good number 1 running back. It might give some fantasy value to Gerhart, especially if they may use him more towards the goal line. So it's a situation to definitely keep your eye on.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's still a 1 for me, but he's not. He's not that overall or top 1, 2, 3. He's more of a, for me, late first round, maybe even into the second round, probably for the first time, maybe since his rookie season, draft pick.
So there you have it from the judge. Book it. So let's move on a little bit to some wide receivers. Some definitely interesting news for a couple teams. We had 3 main holdouts. We talked about MJD a little bit. And Mike Wallace is expected to sign this weekend, so that's definitely a good thing for the Steelers. And Dwayne Bowe signs his offer with the Chiefs. So, Ray, which one do you think actually would have a little bit more fantasy impact, Mike Wallace or Dwayne Bowe?
Well, it's funny. I think Wallace. I guess I have to say Wallace has more impact, but I do think Wallace's impact this year is going to be tempered down a little bit with the emergence of Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. I don't know that Wallace is going to be the same level of receivers he's been in previous years. Dwayne Bowe, for me, is very, he's a sort of a hit-and-miss guy. I mean, he obviously had a real big year, but then, he could disappear for periods of the time. Boy, it's a tough one. I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit, and I'm going to say Dwayne Bowe has the better year than Mike Wallace.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there, and I actually had Mike Wallace in a couple of leagues last year, and I'm a big Pittsburgh fan, so I'm not that I'm down on Mike Wallace, but you're right. There's definitely, Antonio Brown just signed his contract. He had a nice touchdown grab in the game this weekend. Emmanuel Sanders is coming on, and I think in Kansas City they're still kind of looking for their identity. They're definitely moving towards a run-based offense. They got a nice 1-2 punch with a healthy Jamal Charles now. So I think the problem is Matt Castle maybe a serviceable quarterback and needs someone to throw to. And I'm not sure that anyone's really, Jonathan Baldwin has attempted to break out for the Chiefs, but I don't think anyone's really separated. And Dwayne Bowe is definitely the exciting wide receiver there. So I'm going to say agree with you, and Dwayne Bowe has more of an impact I would say a lesser team, but maybe they won't be. Well, that's why they're going to play out the season.
I'll actually say I think Antonio Brown has a better year than Mike Wallace on his own team. I think he's probably now the second best receiver on his own team.
Well, I'll tell you, I think it was 2 weeks ago we went over top 5, and I actually snuck Antonio Brown in my top 5. So that's
top 5 what? Top 5?
Top 5 wide receivers.
What?
So
in the league?
Yep. I did. I'm all about making bold predictions this year.
I'm sorry. Bold's one thing. Crazy's another.
Well, I am a Pittsburgh fan, so
I like Brown. I top 5. Who'd you have at number 6?
I didn't get that far, so we did top 5.
I'm trying to figure out whether you had Calvin Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald. Well, I guess. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Victor Cruz, Andre Johnson, if you're worried about injuries. Okay. I mean, it's a stretch, but you know what? That is, you can thump your chest on that one at the end of the year if he's anywhere near the top 5.
Well, they got Todd Haley coming in, changing the offense. They're Pittsburgh, the ground game just isn't quite what it used to be, and I think they're going to appease Roethlisberger a little more, being thrown a little bit more. And not quite sort of. Megatron, Fitzgerald, I think was number 2. I had A.J. Green up there, and I had Andre Johnson up there.
So you like him more than Victor Cruz? He would be my next guy.
I just, Victor Cruz relies so heavily on the big play. And, they don't have Mario Manningham to take some of the coverage off this year. Hicks, I believe he's still recovering. So I'm not as, we've talked about this before, and as you say, never let facts get in the way of a good argument, but I just have my doubts about that passing game in New York. So
I bold prediction. I'm all for it. And I hope we're in the league together and you draft him 5th overall. Or no, the 5th wide receiver overall.
Well, we're working on that. Actually, we have our draft coming up this weekend, so for the Kick-Ass team. So
that's right.
We'll see how it plays out there. And I'm not, we'll see if I overreach for him. I've been known to do that from time to time, and I can admit to that. But, it'll be fun. So one more wide receiver. Big trouble down in Big Dallas. Austin Miles is out for the preseason. That's just a mess. And I got a name for you that is emerging as a number 3, but the way the receivers are going down in Dallas, he may actually be their number 1. So Austin Miles is out for the preseason.
Yes. Yep. Miles is out. Miles Austin. I never trust a guy with first 2 names. Never trust a guy with 2 first names.
I think I said it both ways, didn't I? There you
go. You got it covered either way. Yeah, and he's been, he a couple of years ago, he looked like he was going to really be, he was going to be a top 5 guy, top 7, 8 guy. Injuries, a little of the emergence of Des Bryant, but he's actually been a little bit of a disappointment as well, really, when you think about all the potential there. Austin is not, he's sort of slowly falling off the fantasy radar from a guy that, I'm trying to remember back, was it 2 or 3 years ago, second or third year of the season, he had something like 180, 190 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns, just sprung onto the scene, and he followed up with a lot of, a real good season after that. And he's fading a little bit, fading from the scene, too many injuries.
Yeah, that's a shame. I actually, before we started our show, and just off the top of my head, and I was actually thinking of Dallas as making a playoff run, but they're just falling apart. Both the wide receiver core and their defensive backfield is just injuries and issues, and I'm concerned about. Well, I'm not really concerned because I would love it if they didn't make the playoffs. But from a fantasy perspective and just from a football perspective, there's a lot of problems I think in Dallas, and there's talk about their window closing, so I'm not sure it hasn't already closed.
Funny story, old habits must die hard, because at the Fantasy Football Fest in Atlantic City Sunday, Phil Simms was there, and he was doing a show, and someone was dressed in Dallas gear. And he just stopped, looked at the guy, and said, "You're having a tough time of it, aren't you, buddy?" And he just started giving it to him. So I'll tell you what, that Giants, Cowboys, us in the Philadelphia area, Eagles, Redskins, that whole rivalry, that's alive and kicking. It was just hysterical to see him just break from the middle of a show and just sort of give it to this guy that was all decked out in Cowboys gear.
That's actually pretty funny. I wish I were there to see it. So yeah, old habits die hard, and Phil Simms was a tough guy in his own right. Even though he was a quarterback up. But so yeah, that would have been a good, nice sight to see. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back. We're going to do some rundowns from fantasy perspective of the Week 2 games. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevost, and with me is Judge Ray Jaffe. So we'll see you here on the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show in 2 minutes.
Listen up, fantasy football owners. If you want top quality, guaranteed authentic sports memorabilia, there's only one place to go. Prestige Sports Marketing. They offer autographed baseball and football jerseys, framed jerseys, helmets, bats, photos, and amazing artwork. They're 100% guaranteed authentic, so you can feel 100% confident. Check out Prestige Sports Marketing at PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. That's PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. Enter promo code ESPN and get 10% off.
Fantasy football owners, the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show is back every Sunday this season with everything you need to cruise into a championship. Join me, the professor,
and me, the commish, along with fantasy insider Matt Lowry. Get all your fantasy football news as we break down all the players and tell you who to start and who to trade while we take your calls all show long.
We'll see you every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. all season long here on 97.3 ESPN. Check us out on the web at kickassfantasyfootball.com.
Are you good at fantasy football? Are you used to winning your fantasy league? Now put your fantasy skills to the ultimate test by playing against the rest of the world with Fantasy Football Evolution. Draft your team and then manage it through a 10-week regular season, a 1-week elimination round, and finally, if you're good enough, a 64-team tournament that will determine the first ever Fantasy Football Evolution champion. The winner of Fantasy Football Evolution receives $25,000, cash prizes paid to the top 16 players. Visit www.nextgenffe.com for more details. The only way to know if you're the best is to don't let your fantasy issues become a reality. Fantasy Judgment is the premier dispute resolution service for all fantasy sports leagues. Led by attorney Michael Stein, the Supreme Court of Fantasy Judgment will resolve any and all issues or conflicts that arise in fantasy leagues. This includes disputed trades, collusion, abuse of power by league commissioners, lineup and roster errors, draft issues, score discrepancies, and interpretation of league rules. We alleviate the burden for league commissioners and allow everyone to focus on winning their leagues rather than arguing over disputes. Visit www.fantasyjudgment.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevost, and with me is my partner in crime, Judge Ray Jaffe. We've got a lot of activity in the chat room, which has been great. Also want to remind everyone that we do have a call-in line at 877-511-1024, so please feel free to call in with your questions. And also visit our website, www.kickassfantasyfootball.com. So, all right, Ray, we went over some news and actually spent a lot of time on it as the relevance gets higher as we get closer to the season. So let's take a little bit and talk about some of the games that happened. So the first one on the list is Cincinnati versus Atlanta, and it looked like Atlanta's in good form for the passing game at least. So why don't we talk a little bit about their passing game?
Yeah, last year everyone was really high, bringing in Julio Jones, Roddy White, Matt Ryan, and I would say they really disappointed a little bit. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, it gelled a little bit as the year went on, and this will be the year where it really comes to the forefront. So I expect big things from Matt Ryan. I like him as he's not going to be a sleeper at this point, but I certainly like him a lot as a QB1. Even in a 10-team league, I think he's gonna be a top 10 quarterback this year. And Julio Jones should only get better. Roddy White, I think, still has gas in the tank. So that's a big trio.
Yeah, the run game's taken a hit, but there was a comment made that why worry about the run game? We know Michael Turner can run. So that's kind of an interesting comment as he's gotten probably 8 carries, I think, total this preseason. Also, on the other side of the field, Cincinnati, Andy Dalton had a 50-yard touchdown to A.J. Green. We just talked about before the break that I had A.J. Green in the top 5, so that's all goodness coming from Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm with you on A.J. Green. I mean, he's a stud. He's a wide receiver 1, so he's, if you get him, you're good. You have one of the big boys. I think he's that good. Dalton, he actually was real solid last year. Don't think he's a QB1, but do like him as a good bye-week backup, QB2. So, look for when your QB has their bye weeks, or maybe if they're playing San Francisco or something like that, and if Dalton has good matchups that week, I'd grab him.
And the only problem out of the Cincinnati passing game was tight end Jermaine Gresham was injured. He was potentially their number 2 target from the passing game, so he has an injured knee, and we'll have to see how that plays out. So let's move on to Cleveland and to Green Bay. We've got a big Green Bay fan here, at least from a fantasy perspective, in the Judge. What happened there? Jordy Nelson looks like he's making some separation as if he needed any since Greg Jennings has been absent. And then on the other side of the ball, Montario Hardesty had 45 yards on 11 carries, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it just goes to show that they do have a running game as they're waiting for Trent Richardson to come back. So what other takes did you get? What comments do you have on Cleveland and Green Bay?
Well, it's a great point, John. My big takeaway from that game, I mean, Cleveland smoked them, but it's preseason, and, we know who Green Bay is. We know who they are. Was that Dennis Green? Something like that. Remember that tirade? Yeah. That was great.
They are who we thought they were.
They are yes, exactly. I'm sure Green Bay is who we think they are. What I thought was really interesting, I mean, Cleveland just ran and ran and ran. And they ran with mixed results, but they ran. I think they had almost 40 carries in the game. Hardesty, Adonis Thomas, Brandon Jackson. And I think all this bodes really well for Trent Richardson. They have a big line. That's the strong suit of their team, their offensive line. And it looks like they have every intention to really pound the ground game. So, for those that have grabbed Trent Richardson or are high on him coming into their drafts, I think this game sort of backed that up. Green Bay side, no Greg Jennings, still recovering from those concussion symptoms. Looks like he'll be there week 1. I do think, personally, Jennings might take a little bit of a step back this year. And a step back for Jennings is he's still a damn good receiver. But I like Jennings to take a small step back coming into this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, Jordy Nelson, we talked about the big play with Victor Cruz, and Jordy Nelson, I think, relied on that a little bit last year. But I think what we're also seeing with Greg Jennings' absence right now is, Jordy Nelson can be an every down receiver and doesn't need the big play to thrive. So I think Greg Jennings will take a step back. And you got probably 2, instead of having a number 1 receiver, you probably have 2 1As right now as soon as Greg Jennings gets back. Moving on, Tennessee and Tampa Bay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in that game? There's a big quarterback battle, looked like, in Tennessee and Tampa Bay. What do you think?
Well, yeah, so Tennessee, the big news, obviously, was Chris Johnson. Pair of 14-yard touchdowns, starting to look like the Chris Johnson that we came to know and love from the fantasy perspective. There would have been a lot of speculation if we hadn't seen the news in the last 24 hours that Jake Locker has been annoyed at the starting quarterback because he actually had a pretty poor game. Pretty poor game is an understatement. He had a quarterback rating of 7.0. But they've seen enough from Locker to make him the guy. Tampa, not much to speak of there. Not much from LeGarrette Blount, who this show, and I guess me in particular, I'll fess up, really like coming into last year. Now they have the rookie Doug Martin, and if Blount has returned to form of last year, which was generally pretty poor, I think Doug Martin's going to steal a lot of carries from him.
Well, I don't even know if steal carries from him. I think Martin will end up being the guy. You don't want to see. I was with you last year on Blount as well. We had a lot of discussions about Tampa Bay, but you don't want to see someone who's battling for carries get injured. That just doesn't bode well. Hopefully he bounces back, and they liked what they saw out of Blount already this preseason. But it does not bode well for LeGarrette. We'll move on. Detroit versus Baltimore. Tell you, I had one take from this game, and I want to see if your take matches my take. What did you take away from Detroit versus Baltimore?
Well, I would say I took away two things. Yes, Calvin Johnson, is on a different planet from everyone else. The separation he frankly, the wide receiver class is deep, and there's not a lot to choose from even among some of the top end guys. But Calvin Johnson, I think, is in a different planet. 5 for 111 touchdown, and if he played much more than a half, I don't think he did. The other thing I think is a little bit of a sleeper, but a guy I really would want to pay attention to is Titus Young, his running mate on the other side. It's going to, I think, get to the point where Johnson is so dominant and teams are scheming for him so much. He's going to go into Randy Moss, I dare I say Jerry Rice territory, where it's just he's constantly going to be doubled and even triple teamed. Titus Young's a really talented guy, and I think it could open up a lot of space for him.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring him up because, obviously, Matt Stafford to Megatron, it just looks like it's midseason already, which bodes well for Stafford as well. I think Stafford's the top 5 quarterback. But, the Titus Young, I think we've talked about him in the past as a sleeper, and I would hold on to that. I think he's definitely going to bring a lot of value to a fantasy team this year. So it's definitely a good second takeaway from that game. Let's move down the list. Miami versus Carolina. This is another situation where we talked about the starting quarterback being anointed, but did not have a good game. And so I'm not really sure, if it was just the situation or if they just didn't want to do much. But, so Ryan Tannehill's named the starter. He doesn't have a good game. But, is there anything else, a particular note from that game? It didn't seem like that was – Carolina, obviously, Cam Newton was performing well. But, you expected that. So what's your take from Miami and Carolina?
My one big takeaway was the most effective quarterback on the day for the Miami Dolphins was the University of Delaware's own Pat Devlin. So thank you. That's the Blue Hen alumnus out there cheering on Mr. Devlin. So he is not in the mix for a starting quarterback job. I'm not even sure he's in the mix for a quarterback job. He might be the third string guy, but no, you hit it right on the head, John. You sort of got what you expected. The big news was made post game when Tannehill was announced to be the starter.
And injury note, Jonathan Stewart did go out of the game with a calf injury. Just signed this big extension, and then he gets hurt. So I don't know if you chalk that up to luck or what you chalk that up to, but Jonathan Stewart is hurt, so monitor that situation. We'll move on. We got Buffalo and Minnesota. Again, it seemed a quiet game, especially from the Buffalo standpoint. They did not look good on offense, but Christian Ponder had his second decent game. He was 10 for 13 and 136 yards and a touchdown. So my question to you, Ray, is that a sign of things to come?
I'm not super high on Ponder. I think he's okay. I don't see him being a particularly big fantasy quarterback. I think he, even though he did have a nice week, I still think he's, likely to be more of a game manager type quarterback. I'm not sure he sneaks in as a QB too. So no, I'm not as sold on Ponder as I am on some of the other second-year quarterbacks. I'm more sold on him than we'll get to the Jacksonville game in a little while here. But like you said, Gerhardt, had a nice game. He had a decent game, so he's been filling in for AP while he's been out. But other than that, yeah, I agree, relatively nondescript.
So that's interesting, especially, Minnesota. I'm not really sure what to make. I see it as a little bit encouraging that they're not just rushing the box to get at Ponder without Adrian Peterson in there. So it's definitely maybe creeping up on the fantasy radar for Minnesota. But Christian Ponder is not going to be a QB1. So, but you're always looking for a fill-in or a surprise, especially in the back half of the season.
The most exciting thing from that game would have been if you played preseason fantasy and you had the Minnesota field goal kicker and defense, because they had 2 touchdown returns for touchdowns, and Blair Walsh, of all people, 5 field goals.
Well, there you go. So there's a name to pop up when you're in that last round looking for a kicker. Jacksonville and New Orleans. We just talked about quarterbacks, and you did a little teaser. Blaine Gabbert, 112 yards and 2 touchdowns. So let's talk a little bit about Blaine Gabbert and Justin Blackmon.
Well, I think it's a little bit of fool's gold. It certainly looks good in the box score. 13 of 60, 112, 2 touchdowns. Of all the rookie quarterbacks last year, Gabbert, frankly, looked the most lost. Confused, unsure of himself. I don't know that has changed through one off season and 1 or 2 preseason game samples. So I still have an awful lot of reservations about Gabbert. He is not, he's not a quarterback I would draft even in a 2 QB type league. I think which means he's beyond number 24 in a 12-team league. He might even be beyond number 28. Blackmon, I think Blackmon is talented. I think there's going to be a problem getting him the ball. I expect he'll be the primary target. I just think there's going to be potentially a problem getting him the ball. And you got to watch the running back situation there as well, because MJD is holding out. We talked about it. Does not look to be a situation where he's going to be returning anytime soon. So Rashad Jennings, certainly a capable backup and a guy to put on your sleeper list.
Yeah, it's one of the situations where I think if you can sneak Rashad Jennings in there at a reasonable round, he could win you some games early on. And sometimes that's just the advantage you need to roll into the playoffs, get a few of those early wins. Just injury of note is just that New Orleans linebacker Chris Chamberlain tore his ACL and is out for the year. And the reason that that's of note, just obviously New Orleans has had some of their problems. Milne was out for the suspended for the season as it is right now. And I think it's just something to look at. We talked about the Atlanta passing game. We talked about Carolina and Cam Newton. So, I think something to look at, especially those teams in their division that they'll be facing twice a year, might be good things going against New Orleans defense.
John, we should mention Chase Daniel, 16 of 21 for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. You think there's a quarterback controversy brewing in New Orleans?
Oh, that's something to watch there, Ray. That's definitely something to watch. All right, so I'll let you folks on the line ponder that question there while we go for our break. Remember, we do have a call-in line, 877-511-1024. This is the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevo, and fantasy expert, Judge Ray Jaffe. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
This fantasy football season, be sure to check out Power Play Fantasy Sports, featuring free and pay-to-play fantasy football games with huge cash prizes. Power Play Fantasy Sports is your home for the 2012 fantasy football season. Visit the website PowerPlayFantasySports.com and use the promo code KICK to receive 20% off your entry in the Power Player Fantasy Football League, featuring a $5,000 grand prize. Again, that's promo code KICK. If you know football, this is the game for you. Visit PowerPlayFantasySports.com today.
Listen up, fantasy football owners. If you want top quality, guaranteed authentic sports memorabilia, there's only one place to go. Prestige Sports Marketing. They offer autographed baseball and football jerseys, framed jerseys, helmets, bats, photos, and amazing artwork. They're 100% guaranteed authentic, so you can feel 100% confident. Check out Prestige Sports Marketing at PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. That's PrestigeSportsMKTG.com. And a promo code ESPN and get 10% off.
Fantasy football owners, the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show is back every Sunday this season with everything you need to cruise into a championship. Join me, the professor,
and me, the commish, along with fantasy insider Matt Lowry. Get all your fantasy football news as we break down all the players and tell you who to start and who to trade while we take your calls all show long.
We'll see you every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. all season long here on 97.3 ESPN. Check us out on the web at kickassfantasyfootball.com.
Don't let your fantasy issues become a reality. Fantasy Judgment is the premier dispute resolution service for all fantasy sports leagues. Led by attorney Michael Stein, the Supreme Court of Fantasy Judgment will resolve any and all issues or conflicts that arise in fantasy leagues. This includes disputed trades, collusion, abuse of power by league commissioners, lineup and roster errors, draft issues, score discrepancies, and interpretation of league rules. We alleviate the burden for league commissioners and allow everyone to focus on winning their leagues rather than arguing over disputes. Visit www.fantasyjudgment.com.
All right, everybody. We're back on the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevost, and with me is fantasy expert Judge Ray Jaffe. So, Ray, I'll tell you, next teams on our list, next game on our list is Oakland versus Arizona. And, we've talked a little bit about the quarterback situation in Arizona. Is there anything else we can say?
Kevin Kolb stinks out loud. He really he does not. I mean, Andy Reid must be a miracle worker with some of the backup quarterbacks he's flipped for picks. I mean, Kolb he frankly does not look like an NFL quarterback. So and he's been hurt a lot. John Skelton, I don't think he's much better, but I can't imagine that Kolb's going to start the season for them. I just can't. He looks terrible.
Again, unless there's something we're just not seeing in practice, what have you. But just from face value, that I would have to agree with that. And you think they're going to be looking to bring someone else in. The one thing I wasn't encouraged, Ryan Williams, running back for Arizona, ran hard. First came back from an knee injury. He ran hard, and I'm not sure that he's going to end up being the number one running back come the beginning of the season. So
yeah, John, and it's unfortunate too because you have Fitzgerald and you have Michael Floyd, the rookie, and it's just they have a lot of talented, skilled position players, and if you don't have a quarterback though, it's hard to get value out of them.
I still find it interesting that most sites have Fitzgerald as the number 2 fantasy quarterback, and even in the same situation last year, he still got his numbers. So it just boggles the mind what he could do if he had someone throwing him the ball.
Right. Exactly. Maybe he would be Calvin Johnson.
Yeah. So it's just amazing. On the flip side, no one's really standing out on offense for Oakland, especially in the receivers. I know we haven't really seen a whole lot of Darren McFadden, but that's by design because of his injury history, I'm sure. But there's just not only is no one standing out for Oakland in the wide receiver, but Jacoby Ford is hurt. So their offense. Do you see any value in any Oakland offense other than McFadden this year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously McFadden's the guy. I do think Hayward Bay. I think once you get off the fact that he's never going to perform like an elite wide receiver, I think he's still a valuable wide receiver. So while he's been a bit of a disappointment from being taken so high in the draft, I think if you sort of clear your mind of that, there's still value there with Hayward Bay, as maybe a wide receiver 3 or certainly a flex player.
All right, we're going to move quickly on. We've got a couple more teams to cover. Time is running out. And real quick, New York Jets versus New York Giants. Jets offense is just looking bad right now. There's just nothing coming out of there. For the Giants, Victor Cruz did have 5 receptions for 51 yards, so Victor Cruz looks like he's ready to go. From an injury standpoint, Ahmad Bradshaw had a hand injury, and the Giants also lost cornerback Jaron Hosley, which he had turf toe, which may not seem like a whole lot, but they're already thin with cornerback Terrell Thomas out. So, again, it's one of those instances where their secondary may not be up to par. So Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, you may be looking a little bit more at their passers. Speaking of Washington versus Chicago, RJ3 was not sharp. He's still a rookie, so we'll give him a little benefit there. But Ray, why don't you go ahead and talk to us a little bit about Chicago? They look like they look good on offense, I have to say.
Yeah, and it's the running back situation in Chicago is interesting. Forte, obviously the big time back, but they brought on Michael Bush, and Forte was not happy when they brought on Bush particularly, and lo and behold, 2 touchdowns in this game. Michael Bush, Forte with none. So whether he's going to steal touchdowns from him or carries, it does put a little ding into Forte's value. The upside, if Forte gets hurt again, Bush, as we know, we love Bush on this show, and he was a tremendously effective lead running back, frankly, when McFadden was out last year with the Raiders. So
we do love Bush.
We do. And then Brandon Marshall, Cutler back together. I think that's going to be. I think both of them are going to be very viable in fantasy this year.
So a couple injuries from Washington, linebacker Brian Orakpo and safety Brandon Merriweather were both went out of the game. So just keep a monitor on that. San Francisco versus Houston. Again, we talked at the beginning of the show. It's a big day for quarterbacks. Matt Schaub, 11 for 14, 128 yards and a touchdown. Andre Johnson had 49 yards on 2 receptions. So they look to be in good form. San Francisco lost Brandon Jacobs and LaMichael James to injuries, which they're still pretty strong with Kendall Hunter as a backup. So I'm not really too worried right there, but just some injuries of note. Kansas City versus St. Louis. Sam Bradford, limited action, 6 for 9, 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Steven Jackson, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Steven Jackson? Seven carries for 49 yards, but is he going to be an elite back this year, Ray? I'm curious as your perception there.
Yeah, I think so. I actually look for a bit of a bounce back from Bradford as well. So with Bradford bouncing back, they should get a little bit more out of the passing game. So no, I like Jackson. I think Jackson will be, when we say elite, I'll say he's going to be a top 12 running back. I'm not sure if that makes him elite or not, but certainly a starter.
Just an injury note. Wide receiver Brian Quick went out of the game with back injury, and he was definitely vying for a spot there as a top receiver. They're expecting a lot of things out of him, big things out of him, but he does have a back injury. Seattle versus Denver, we talked about these quarterback controversies, and Russell Wilson. So, Ray, I know you're definitely monitoring the situation in Seattle. So, what do you take from Russell Wilson's big game?
Yeah, we hit on it earlier. I mean, it was big enough that he's going to start next week. So they obviously really want to see what they have with Wilson. 10 of 17, 155 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then he runs too. So 5 rushes, 33 yards. If the rookie quarterbacks, the young quarterbacks, the guys that run. I mean, Newton did it all last year, but RG3, Russell Wilson, even the other guys, Vic when he came in, they're very viable. Even Tebow. I mean, as bad as he is, he was a decent fantasy contributor because he gets so much with the legs. So if Wilson does make his way into the field, you gotta keep him on your radar.
Also of note that Seattle had 224 yards rushing. So I think they're quietly turning into a pretty good offensive unit there. We're going to rush over Peyton Manning, believe it or not. And the reason why I want to do that, he had 177 yards. He threw two interceptions, mostly on shorter routes. Didn't really throw the deep ball. I think we need to see a little bit more about Peyton Manning before we pass judgment. So we're going to kind of skip over that, and I'm sure we'll have enough to say about him next week. So Dallas, San Diego, I teased earlier about a receiver in Dallas named Cole Beasley. He had 104 yards and 7 receptions, and as I mentioned, he's quietly put himself in the spot for the third receiver, but he may have been a starter in Dallas before long, based on their injury situation and the issues that they've had. For San Diego, not a good day at all for San Diego, but again, I think it's one of the things where we kind of know where they are, just from Phillip Rivers' perspective. But wide receiver Vincent Brown broke his ankle. I believe he's done for the year. I know, Ray, you had some good aspirations for Vincent Brown. So
yeah, it's a big loss. I think that's a real significant loss. I think he was primed to have like a wide receiver 2 kind of year, especially with Vincent Jackson moving on and becoming more of the lead guy. So yeah, it's a big loss for San Diego, and if you draft him in fantasy, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. All right, so my 2 favorite teams are coming up. We had Indy versus Pitt. So with solid game for Andrew Luck. Didn't start off great, threw an interception, but came back, shrugged it off, came back and threw a good game. Had 3 scores, 2 touchdowns and a field goal, I believe it was, in his next 4 drives. And we talked about Antonio Brown. He had 75 yards and a touchdown. Maybe even the biggest news of the day, though, was Austin Collie had what has been termed a concussion, which would be his 4th in 15 months. And so in our last minute, let's talk real quick about Philadelphia versus New England. So, Ray, why don't you tell us a little bit about the quarterback situation in Philadelphia?
Well, obviously, Vic, again, hurt early, only had 3 attempts. So, Vic, we've had 0 preseason from Michael Vick. The big story in Philadelphia is Nick Foles, the rookie quarterback, 3rd-round pick who had a good game last week. He probably had a better game this week because he was playing, even though New England sat players, he was playing even against some first-string defenders. So he looks real good, and with Vic's injury history, there's a damn good chance that Nick Foles might be starting some games for Philadelphia Eagles this year. So very interesting development to watch.
Yeah, I was impressed. I was also impressed with tight end Clay Harbor. He caught both of Nick Foles' touchdowns. So if you're looking for a tight end fill-in, and Clay Harbor's making a name for himself not only in Philadelphia but possibly in the fantasy world. And then so Michael Vick hurt his ribs. X-rays are negative, but I think you're right, Ray. We could be seeing Nick Foles as a starting quarterback sooner rather than later.
Yeah, he can't stay on the field. I mean, Vic he cannot stay on the field.
All right, and so wide receiver Deshaun Jackson had 82 yards as well. So all in all, not a bad day from Philadelphia. I'm not sure what the A game New England brought, but there you go. So all right, everyone. Just wanted to thank you once again for listening to the Kick-Ass Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Jumpin' John Prevost, and with me is my partner in crime, Judge Ray Jaffe. We'll be back next week at 9 o'clock. So thank you all for listening. Hey, you there, Ray? Ray, you still there? Ray, you still there?